They discovered one of the greatest voices in country music history, propelling Loretta Lynn from obscurity to icondom. But the woman they propelled to stardom eventually sued them in a bitterly public legal battle. They were denied the chance to record a song that would become one of the biggest hits of all time, Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. For a decade, their TV show launched countless stars, but their reputation in Nashville was that of hard-nosed, unloved businessmen who were eventually sidelined by the industry they helped build. This is the paradoxical and tragic story of the Wilburn Brothers, Doyle and Teddy. To the public, they were beloved members of the Grand Ole Opry, a duo whose voices blended perfectly. But behind the scenes, they were powerful moguls with a complicated legacy of groundbreaking success and historic mistakes. This is the story of two brothers who rose from abject poverty to become Nashville kingmakers, only to be quietly forgotten, denied a spot in the Country Music Hall of Fame, a tragedy of oblivion that remains controversial to this day. To understand the hardened ambition and the deep-seated insecurities that would define the Wilburn Brothers, you have to travel back to their beginning, a place and time that seems almost impossibly distant from the glamour of Nashville. You have to go to the rugged, impoverished, and fiercely independent world of the Ozark Mountains in Hardy, Arkansas. Virgil Doyle Wilburn was born on July 7, 1930, and his younger brother Thurman Theodore, or Teddy, followed on November 30th, 1931. They arrived in the world right as the Great Depression was tightening its grip and turning the chronic hardship of the rural Ozarks into a state of outright desperation. They were the two youngest of 5 children born to Benjamin and Katie Wilburn, a family living on the absolute margins of American society. Their father, known to everyone as Pop, was a disabled veteran of World War I. The injuries he sustained in the trenches of Europe had left him unable to perform the kind of steady, heavy labor that was the only real work available. He was a man stripped of his physical strength in a world that demanded it, struggling to find odd jobs to support his large and growing family. Life was a constant, grinding battle for survival. The family lived in a simple, unpainted shack, often without electricity or running water. Food was scarce, and the future was a terrifying, formless fog. In this world, music was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. It was one of the few forms of entertainment that was free, one of the few sources of joy in a landscape of deprivation. It was the only real escape from the crushing reality of poverty and the grim prospect of a future spent in the same cycle of back-breaking, low-wage manual labor. The story of how the Wilburn family officially entered the world of show business is a legend of pure, unadulterated desperation, a perfect illustration of their hard-scrabble origins. As the family legend goes, one day a traveling family of performers, a common sight in those days, had their car break down near the Wilburns' humble home. To earn enough money for the necessary repairs, the family unpacked their instruments and started performing on the street for whatever spare change they could collect. For Pop Wilburn, watching this scene unfold, a light went on. He saw not just a way to fix a car, he saw a way to feed his children. He saw a way out. In an act of incredible faith or perhaps sheer desperate recklessness, Pop took what little money the family had scraped together and went to the one place a poor man could still dream, the Sears, Roebuck, and Company catalog. He ordered a set of musical instruments on credit. He handed a guitar to his eldest son, Lester, a fiddle to Leslie, a big upright bass to his daughter Geraldine, a small mandolin to little Teddy, and another guitar to Doyle. The Wilburn family band was born, not out of a lofty artistic dream, but out of the stark, immediate necessity of survival. What followed was not a charming Little House on the Prairie story of a family making music for fun. Their early life was a form of child labor, a relentless, soul-crushing grind that would be unthinkable today. Pop Wilburn was a stern, demanding taskmaster. He drilled the children for hours on end, teaching them the simple chords and gospel harmonies he knew. Their practice sessions were not filled with joy. They were filled with pressure. A missed note was not a mistake. It was a potential threat to the family's next meal. Starting in 1937, when Doyle was just 7 years old and Teddy was a mere 6, their professional careers began. Their father would drive them to the nearby town of Thayer, Missouri, a slightly larger and more prosperous community just across the state line. He would position them on a busy street corner, and the children, barely tall enough to see over their own instruments, would play for whatever coins passers-by would toss their way. They weren't just playing for fun, they were playing for their supper. Teddy would later recall this period with a chilling bitterness that never left him, describing it in interviews as a lifelike hell. The immense pressure to perform, to literally sing for their survival, to smile and charm strangers for a few pennies, forged in the two youngest brothers a tough, pragmatic, and deeply unsentimental approach to the music business that would define the rest of their careers. They learned early and hard that a song was not a piece of art. It was a commodity, and you had to fight for every dollar it was worth. They were, however, prodigiously talented. Their sibling harmonies, a sound that can only come from shared blood and a shared childhood, were tight, pure, and emotionally resonant. Their small, earnest faces and their surprising musical proficiency could stop people in their tracks. They began to build a local reputation, and Pop, ever the opportunist, started entering them in amateur talent contests across the region. They almost always won. Their big break, the moment that lifted them from the street corners to a professional stage, came when they won a major talent competition in Birmingham, Alabama. In the audience that day was one of the biggest stars in all of country music, the legendary Roy Acuff, the king of country music himself. Acuff was so impressed by the prodigious talent and the heartbreaking story of the Wilburn children that he made them an offer that seemed like a miracle. He wanted to bring them to Nashville to perform on the biggest stage of them all, the Grand Ole Opry. In 1940, Doyle and Teddy, at the astonishingly young ages of 10 and 9, along with their older siblings, stepped into the sacred circle of wood on the stage of the Ryman Auditorium. For a poor family from the backwoods of Arkansas, it was like being transported to another planet. They were sharing a stage with their heroes, the very voices they had strained to hear on their crackling, battery-powered radio. It should have been the glorious start of a fairy tale. Instead, it was a crushing and traumatic blow that would shape their worldview forever. After just 6 months of performing regularly on the Opry, the Wilburn family was unceremoniously fired. The reason had nothing to do with their talent. It was the law. They were children, and their employment on a nationally broadcast show was a flagrant violation of the recently enacted child labor laws, specifically the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children had intervened, and the Opry management, fearing a scandal, had no choice but to let them go. For the Wilburn family, it was a catastrophe. The dream was over as quickly as it had begun. The one steady source of income, the one hope they had for escaping poverty, was snatched away. The family unit, which had been held together by the glue of their shared musical ambition, began to fall apart. Their older sister Geraldine, seeing a bleak future on the road, left the band to get married. The boys were once again facing a future of desperate poverty. The experience left a deep and lasting scar on Doyle and Teddy. They had been given a glimpse of the promised land, only to have the gates slammed shut in their faces. It taught them a hard lesson. Talent wasn't enough. The business was cold, impersonal, and governed by forces beyond their control. It was a lesson they would never forget. After the Opry heartbreak, the four remaining brothers, Lester, Leslie, Doyle, and Teddy, tried to keep the family band alive, but the magic and the momentum were gone. They drifted through their teenage years, the memory of their brief moment of fame, a bitter reminder of what they had lost. The Second World War brought another interruption, with the older brothers serving in the military. It wasn't until 1948 that their professional careers truly began again. As young men, they landed a regular spot on a radio show that was fast becoming the Opry's biggest and most exciting rival, the Louisiana Hayride. Broadcast with a raw electric energy from the Municipal Auditorium in Shreveport, Louisiana, the Hayride was the cradle of the stars. It was a younger, wilder, and more adventurous show than the Opry, the place that would famously launch the careers of the great Hank Williams, and a few years later, a young truck driver from Mississippi named Elvis Presley. It was on the stage of the Louisiana Hayride that the Wilburns honed their professional skills, transitioning from a family novelty act to a polished professional group. It was here that they made their first real connections in the music industry, signing their first record deal with the Four Star Records label. But just as their careers were finally taking off for the second time, fate intervened again with a familiar cruelty. In 1951, with the Korean War raging, both Doyle and Teddy, the heart and soul of the group, were drafted into the U.S. Army. The act was once again put on hold, their hard-won momentum stalled by global conflict. Like so many other country artists of their generation, they served their time, with Teddy playing in bands to entertain the troops, a world away from the bright lights of Shreveport. The long, frustrating cycle of hope and interruption that had defined their childhoods was continuing into their young adulthood. When they finally returned from their military service in 1953, they were no longer boys, but men, hardened by their experiences and more determined than ever to finally claim the success that had been so consistently denied them. The hard lessons of their youth had been learned. This time, they would not be denied. Returning from military service, Doyle and Teddy Wilburn were no longer the vulnerable children who had been dismissed from the Grand Ole Opry. They were men, hardened by discipline and the lingering memories of a childhood spent fighting for survival. This was, in essence, their third attempt at a career, and they were armed with a deep-seated understanding that talent was only half the battle. As they immediately threw themselves back into the relentless grind of the road, joining the package tours that crisscrossed the country, they were determined not just to sing, but to master the business that had once so easily cast them aside. Their big break came in 1954 when they signed a recording contract with one of the most powerful and prestigious labels in the industry, Decca Records. This was the house that had built legends like Ernest Tubb and Kitty Wells. For the Wilburns, it was a signal that they had finally been accepted into the major leagues. Their first hit as a duo, a heartfelt duet with the reigning king of honky-tonk Webb Pierce, called Sparkling Brown Eyes, was a smash, shooting to number 4 on the country charts. This success, coupled with their official reinstatement as members of the Grand Ole Opry in 1953, cemented their status as one of the hottest rising acts in country music. The Wilburn Brothers had finally, definitively arrived. And it was at this precise moment, at the absolute peak of their early success in 1956, that they made one of the most famous, most analyzed, and most catastrophically bad business decisions in the history of popular music. The story has become a part of Nashville folklore, a cautionary tale whispered among songwriters and producers for generations. A young, unknown songwriter and song plugger named Mayborn Axton, who knew the brothers, approached them with a strange, moody new song she had co-written. The song was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was dark, bluesy, and full of a kind of brooding, existential despair that was completely alien to the wholesome, straightforward storytelling of mainstream country music. It had a bizarre, evocative title, Heartbreak Hotel. Doyle and Teddy listened to the demo, and they were completely baffled. Their own music was built on the foundations of classic brother harmony, gospel sincerity, and tales of love and heartache. This song was different. It was, as they would later admit, too strange and morbid for their tastes. They couldn't imagine their fans wanting to hear a song about a lonely, broken-down hotel at the end of a desolate street. With polite regrets, they turned it down. A short time later, Axton played the song for another young artist who had just been signed to RCA Records in Nashville. That artist was Elvis Presley. Heartbreak Hotel would become Elvis's first million-selling single, a world-altering record that would ignite the rock and roll revolution. The Wilburns had let a piece of history and a fortune slip right through their fingers. The decision, born of their own conservative musical tastes and a cautious business sense, would haunt them for the rest of their lives, a constant nagging reminder of the monumental opportunity they had missed. Despite the Heartbreak Hotel blunder, the Wilburn Brothers' own career continued its steady upward climb. They became one of the most consistently successful brother duos in country music, placing more than 30 singles on the charts throughout the late 1950s and 1960s. They were masters of the classic country sound, their pristine harmonies shining on hits like the jaunty Go Away With Me, the Cheatin' song Which One Is to Blame, and the chart-topping Trouble's Back in Town. They were awarded a unique lifetime recording contract from Decca, a testament to their reliability and success. But as their fame as performers grew, so did their ambition as businessmen. The memories of their impoverished childhood and the trauma of being cast aside by the Opry had instilled in them a deep-seated need for control and financial security. They were determined never to be at the mercy of others again. In 1957, they took a groundbreaking step. Along with the legendary steel guitarist Don Helms, they founded their own music publishing company, Surefire Music. In an era when most artists unthinkingly signed away their lucrative publishing rights to the record labels, this was a revolutionary move. It meant they not only profited from their own songs, but could sign other songwriters and control a growing catalog of music. A few years later, they expanded their empire, launching the Wilhelm Talent Agency, a booking agency that would manage the careers of other artists. They were no longer just singers. They were becoming a Nashville powerhouse. They were vertically integrated, able to discover an artist, sign them to their talent agency, publish their songs through Surefire Music, get them a record deal with their connections at Decca, and put them on tour as their opening act. This level of control was unprecedented for artists at the time, and it made them two of the most influential men in town. It also earned them a reputation. While respected for their business savvy, they were also seen as tough, hard-nosed, and utterly uncompromising negotiators. The two boys who once had to play for pennies on a street corner were now building an empire, and they were not about to let anyone get the better of them. And in 1960, they made the single most important discovery of their careers, an artist who would become both their greatest success story and the source of their most damaging controversy. They were on a trip to the West Coast when they saw a young, completely unknown singer from Washington State. She was a self-taught coal miner's daughter, a mother of four with a powerful, unmistakable voice and a raw, honest songwriting talent that was unlike anything they had ever heard. Her name was Loretta Lynn. The Wilburns were captivated. They saw in her the same kind of authentic, unvarnished country soul that they themselves had come from. They immediately signed her to their agency and took her under their wing. They became her champions, her mentors, and her managers. They brought her to Nashville, put her on their tour bus, and gave her a regular spot on the Grand Ole Opry as their guest, introducing her to the Nashville audience. Most importantly, they used their considerable influence at Decca Records to get her a recording contract. For the first crucial decade of her career, the Wilburn Brothers were the architects of Loretta Lynn's rise to superstardom. Their own stardom reached its zenith in 1963 when they launched the Wilburn Brothers Show, one of the first and most successful syndicated country music shows in the history of television. For over a decade, their charming homespun show was beamed into millions of living rooms across America. It made the handsome, smiling faces of Doyle and Teddy two of the most recognizable in country music. The show was a simple winning formula. The brothers would perform their hits, engage in lighthearted comedy banter, and, most importantly, showcase guest stars. They used their powerful platform to introduce the world to a generation of future legends. A regular feature, of course, was their brilliant protege, Loretta Lynn, whose appearances on the show were crucial to her early success. They also gave some of the first major television exposure to a young singer named Crystal Gale, Loretta's younger sister, a teenage Barbara Mandrell, and a gospel quartet called the Oak Ridge Boys. The show was their crowning achievement, cementing their status as national television stars and Nashville kingmakers. Beneath the surface of their traditional family-friendly image, the show also revealed a hidden layer of social consciousness. During the height of the Vietnam War, they recorded and performed surprisingly topical songs, like "The War Keeps Dragging On," offering a gentle, mournful anti-war perspective that was incredibly rare in the largely conservative world of country music at the time. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a hint at a depth that their public persona often concealed. For a time, it seemed the Wilburn Brothers had it all. They were hit makers, Opry stars, television icons, and the most powerful music publishers and agents in Nashville. Their partnership with Loretta Lynn was the most successful in town, but the very control that had allowed them to build their empire was about to become their undoing. The relationship with their greatest discovery was beginning to fracture. Lynn, now a superstar in her own right, felt that the brothers were too controlling, taking too large a percentage of her hard-won earnings and refusing to allow her the creative and financial freedom she had earned. In 1971, the unthinkable happened. Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter they had lifted from obscurity, filed a lawsuit against the Wilburn brothers. She claimed they were withholding royalties from her and were unfairly blocking her from taking control of her own publishing. The lawsuit sent shock waves through the tight-knit, insular world of Nashville. It was a bitter public and deeply personal battle that pitted the industry's most powerful new star against the men who had made her. From the Wilburns' perspective, they had invested everything in Loretta, taking a huge financial and professional risk on an unknown artist. They saw her lawsuit as an act of profound, almost familial betrayal. Teddy would later refer to it as a painful family misunderstanding. From Lynn's perspective, she was a grown woman and a major star, and she was fighting for her professional freedom. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court, but the damage to the Wilburns' reputation was immense and permanent. The incident revealed a darker, more grasping side to their business practices. It cemented their image in the Nashville community as men who were tough, perhaps too tough, and who held on too tightly. The lawsuit confirmed what many had whispered for years. The Wilburn brothers were not the easiest men to work with. This reputation as being not the nicest guys in Nashville, fair or not, would have long-lasting and devastating consequences, particularly when it came to their ultimate place in the pantheon of country music history. The Kings of Nashville had built a mighty castle, but now a crack was showing in its very foundation. That crack in the foundation, exposed by the bitter lawsuit with Loretta Lynn, would never truly be repaired. While the Wilburn brothers remained stars on the surface, the legal battle marked a profound turning point. A shadow now hung over their reputation in the close-knit Nashville community, and the perception of them within the industry's inner circle had been permanently altered. As the 1970s brought profound changes to the sound of country music, the Kings of Nashville, now seen as embattled rulers, would begin the long, slow decline of their empire. The 1970s was a decade of profound change in country music, and the Wilburn brothers, who had been at the forefront of the business for so long, found themselves struggling to keep up. The slick, string-laden countrypolitan sound was dominating the charts, and a rebellious new outlaw movement, led by figures like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, was capturing the imagination of a new generation of fans. In this new landscape, the Wilburns' traditional brother harmony sound, once the bedrock of the genre, began to feel dated, a relic of a simpler time. Their chart success, which had been so consistent for over a decade, began to dwindle. The most significant blow came in 1974, when, after an incredible 354-episode run, The Wilburn Brothers Show went off the air. The end of their television show was a symbolic moment. It was the loss of their most powerful platform, the engine that had driven their fame and their influence for 11 years. Without the weekly national exposure, their star began to fade. They were still respected members of the Grand Ole Opry, still capable of drawing a loyal crowd on the road, but their time at the very center of the country music universe was over. They were transitioning from active hitmakers to living legends, giants of a bygone era, struggling to find their place in a new and unfamiliar world. At the same time, the relentless lifestyle of a touring musician was beginning to take its toll, particularly on Doyle. He was a heavy smoker, a habit he had picked up in his youth and never managed to shake. The thousands of nights spent in smoky bars and drafty auditoriums, the endless miles on the tour bus, and the constant pressure of running a business empire were catching up with him. A weariness began to set in, a quiet fading of the vibrant energy that had once defined him. The final tragic blow to the legendary duo came with a brutal swiftness. In 1982, Doyle was diagnosed with lung cancer. He fought the disease with the same quiet, stoic courage that had defined his entire life. He continued to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, his voice still strong, until just a month before his death, refusing to let the illness silence the music. But the disease was aggressive and unforgiving. On October 16th, 1982, Virgil Doyle Wilburn passed away. He was just 52 years old. The death of his older brother was a blow from which Teddy would never fully recover. The Wilburn brothers, the professional act and the central relationship of his life, were gone. He described the loss with a heartbreaking simplicity that spoke volumes about the depth of their bond. It was like a 45-year marriage had just ended. For Teddy, it wasn't just the end of a band. It was the loss of his other half, the man who had stood by his side since they were small children singing for pennies on a dusty street corner. He attempted a solo career, but his heart was no longer in it. The magic was gone. The perfect harmony could never be recreated. He gradually withdrew from the music business, his appearances at the Opry becoming more and more infrequent. He was a man adrift, a lonely survivor of a legendary partnership. For 2 decades, he lived a quiet life, largely out of the public eye. His own health began to fail, and on November 24, 2003, just 6 days shy of his 72nd birthday, Teddy Wilburn passed away from congestive heart failure. The two brothers, who had been inseparable in life, were laid to rest near each other in the Nashville National Cemetery, their lifelong bond finally made eternal. The story should end there, a sad but noble conclusion to a remarkable career. But with the Wilburn brothers, the story is never that simple. In the years since their deaths, a quiet but persistent debate has raged within the country music community. A debate that centers on a glaring and controversial omission. It is the central question of their legacy. Why are the Wilburn brothers not in the Country Music Hall of Fame? Their case for induction is, on the surface, overwhelming. They were members of the Grand Ole Opry for half a century, from their first childhood appearance to the end of their lives. They placed more than 30 singles on the country charts. Their television show was one of the most popular and influential in the genre's history, a crucial platform that launched the careers of a dozen future Hall of Famers. And most significantly, their role as the architects of Loretta Lynn's career is an undeniable history-making achievement. By any reasonable measure of success and influence, their bronze plaques should have been mounted on the wall years ago. But they are not there, and the reasons why speak to the complex and often unforgiving nature of the Nashville establishment. The bitter lawsuit with Loretta Lynn is the primary exhibit in the case against them. It permanently damaged their reputation among their peers, the very people who make up a significant portion of the Hall of Fame's anonymous voting body. The lawsuit cemented their reputation as men who were brilliant at business, but perhaps lacking in grace. They were seen as tough, controlling, and, in the end, greedy. There is also the argument that, for all their success, they never had a truly massive, career-defining monster #1 hit, a song like Coal Miner's Daughter or He Stopped Loving Her Today that becomes a cultural touchstone. Their success was broad and consistent, but some argue it lacked the iconic peak required for country music's highest honor. Their forgotten status, then, is not an accident of history, but the result of a quiet, decades-long cold shoulder from the Nashville inner circle they had once ruled, but had never truly charmed. This is the ultimate paradox and the final tragedy of the Wilburn brothers. They were heroes to the artists they championed, particularly the women they lifted from obscurity. But they came to be seen as villains by their greatest discovery. They were beloved by millions of television viewers who welcomed them into their homes every week. But they were kept at arm's length by the Nashville establishment. Their legacy is a complicated and cautionary one. It is a story of incredible talent and even greater ambition, a story of how two dirt-poor boys from Arkansas clawed their way to the very top of the music world. But it is also a story of how business and relationships, of how a reputation for being tough in a town that values charm, can ultimately define an artist's legacy as much or even more than their music. The Wilburn brothers may never get their plaques in the Hall of Fame, but their ghost will continue to haunt its halls, a silent testament to a brilliant, flawed, and unforgettable chapter in the story of country music. They were the ultimate Nashville paradox, the brothers who helped build the city's greatest stars, only to find themselves left outside the gates of its most sacred hall of honor.